Good afternoon, everyone. Meteorologist Efren Afante here. We're on WLTX News 19's Facebook page. We're on Facebook Live. So if you happen to see this a little later on, we will have this actually on the Facebook page after we end the live coverage. So the time right now is 12:40. Give it a second, just giving you an update on right now what's going on with Hurricane Irma. And there's been a lot of questions that have been asked. Where is it going to go? How strong it's going to be? How's it going to affect South Carolina? You know, is it going to the Gulf? So here, I'm going to answer all of your questions. And while I'm doing this, as soon as we get to the Q&A side, you know, our web manager, Tony, is going to be giving me some of the questions that you're going to be asking. So ask the questions away after I give you a little update. Now, as of 11 o'clock, the National Hurricane Center actually updated the hurricane. Now, you can see it is a very, for all intents and purposes, it is a small but very tightly wound hurricane and definitely a major hurricane. The latest information from the National Hurricane Center put it as a Category 3 hurricane. The wind sustained at 120, gusting to 150 miles an hour. Officially, the track was still continuing taking to the west and southwest at about 14 miles an hour. Now, one really interesting thing that came out of this morning or midday today, the National Hurricane Center actually has a hurricane hunter. There's a plane right now. It's been transecting around and through Hurricane Irma. What's really interesting is that one of the data that came through was that at some point, probably about 11 o'clock this morning, the hurricane hunter was indicating that about 25 to 30 nautical miles to the east of the eye wall of Hurricane Irma, the winds were clocked at about 130 miles an hour at the surface of the hurricane, so right at the ocean. If that is the actual case, and it was at least at 130 miles an hour, well, 130 miles an hour put it as a Category 4 hurricane. So again, it's collecting data. We had one earlier this morning that flew through, around, and then that already landed. This hurricane hunter actually came out from Puerto Rico, and its 6-hour trek will take it around the hurricane. So this way, when we get the next update from the National Hurricane Center, shortly after 4 o'clock, but before 5 this afternoon, we'll have more information, and more importantly, another plane will be taking off in about an hour or so. It's a high-altitude aircraft. And the most important thing about that high-altitude aircraft is they have something called drop signs. It's basically weather recording devices that they drop anywhere from 40 to 30 to 20,000 feet above the sea. And they will drop it in multiple locations around and inside the hurricane. And then once we get that information to the National Hurricane Center, then they will put out the new product and give us more information of, importantly, what's been going on, because all the information before yesterday morning was based on algorithms and computer-generated information, strictly and solely by observations from satellite. Now, as of this morning, and by midday, hurricane warnings were already in effect for the British Virgin Islands, whereas hurricane watches and tropical storm watches for the southern portions of the Lesser Antilles. The U.S. Virgin Islands and the island of Puerto Rico was by this late this morning under a hurricane watch. So that's in effect already. By Wednesday morning, this could be affecting the British Virgin Islands as a very strong Category 4 hurricane with the potential winds of about 145 miles an hour. By Thursday morning, it'll put it just to the northeast, somewhere in the sector to the northeast of Hispaniola. The island of Hispaniola is on the eastern side, the Dominican Republic on the west side, Haiti. Now, the 5-day track does take it somewhere around Cuba. Now, that's the center line, but be very leery of this, because on a 5-day track, the cone of uncertainty, why there's this big cone, is we really don't know what's going to be to the northern end, to the southern end, or in the middle. So the 5-day track this by Saturday morning as a very strong Category 4 hurricane with 130 mile an hour winds. It could be as far south as Jamaica to as far north as the Bahamas and the Northern Caribbean. So keep that in mind. This 5-day track puts it really anywhere in this area. So don't look so much of where that red line is. Just pay attention to where the cone of uncertainty puts it. Now, a lot of the computer models that we use in-house, we've strung that all together, and these are called spaghetti plots. Multiple different models of telling us what it is. Now, 4 or 5 days ago, a lot of these spaghetti model plots had it a lot further north. By Saturday, a little bit further south. By Sunday, even more south. What's been going on is that the track has been consistent as far as the bands being put together, but now the consensus is it'll be north of Puerto Rico by Wednesday morning. It'll be north of the Dominican Republic by Thursday morning. It'll be north of the eastern end and the northern shorelines of Cuba by Friday morning. But by Saturday, a lot of the computer models are indicating that by Saturday morning, this could potentially, and I use that word strongly, potentially be putting itself anywhere, either making landfall on the north shore of central Cuba or right over the center port of central Cuba. So that's a 5-day track. Now after that, there's two different computer models. There's something called the GFS, which is the Global Forecast System. There's something called the European or the Euro model. They have it in two different directions, and it's not important right now of which way it shows. Some models on a 7-8 day track take it to the Gulf and to the west side of Florida. A couple of computer models are taking it up the coastline on a 7-8 day track on the eastern side of Florida. Do not take that under consideration at this point. There's just way too much uncertainty, even if day 5, let alone for day 7, if it's going to be in the Gulf or if it's going to be in the Atlantic. Another thing that I want to make sure everybody understands, and if you see this on social media, be very aware of this. This is the official information from the National Hurricane Center and from the spaghetti models. If you see anything out there that suggests a 6, 7, 9 day model, so basically if they show anything that's past Saturday afternoon, it's bogus. The data information may be accurate, but as far as where the information is coming from, it's not coming from the National Hurricane Center. There's been a lot of information out there that has been quite simply bogus, okay? And so don't go by any of that. The only reliable source would be from broadcast meteorologists and from meteorologists who are working specifically for the National Hurricane Center and for global meteorologists who work for other meteorological agencies. I will say this though, a lot of computer information that's been generated by the National Hurricane Center has been augmented by other people, and they have posted it on their Facebook page and on their Twitter. So here's how, heads up for you folks. If you take any documentation from the National Hurricane Center and you augment it to make it look a little bit different, instead of a 5-day track, you put a 6, 7, 8 day track, and you literally show it transcending anywhere into the Gulf, making landfall anywhere in the East Coast. Not only are you doing a disservice to the general public by giving out false information that you think is the right thing, you're also committing a federal crime. Do not accept any information that is not from a trusted broadcast meteorologist, operational meteorologist, or from the National Hurricane Center. And above all, don't even bother trying to make any of those, because it is a federal offense. Now, as far as what we're expecting, again, there is Hurricane Irma as a Category 3 hurricane with winds at 120 miles an hour, gusting to 150. And again, we're on Facebook Live right now, so we want you to ask us the questions, and Tony's going to be letting you know some of the questions that people are asking. And Tony, what do you have so far?
You might imagine most people want to know is what they're going to do about.
Right. So Tony says that a lot of people are asking about what is it going to do to South Carolina? Now, is it actually going to be affecting us here in the Palmetto State? Well, here's the thing. This is the 5-day track, okay, from the National Hurricane Center. Here are the multiple tracks from various different agencies, and not just in the U.S. This comes from the U.S., this comes from the Japanese Meteorological Agency, this comes from the European model, this comes from the United Kingdom Meteorology Office. So this 5-day track takes it, the northern track takes it into Nassau in the Bahamas. The southern track takes it right over Cuba, and in fact it actually crosses through Cuba, and some models are indicating that it's going to eject just to the south shorelines of central Cuba. So that's 5 days. So let's just paint a picture of what if, just so that you have a better idea. If this track, for whatever reason, makes it through Key West, Florida, the Florida Keys, and then ejects into the Gulf of Mexico, well, a couple of computer models are indicating that it will then turn north up the west coastline of Florida and possibly into the Big Bend of Florida, and then into Georgia. Well, it's other computer models indicating that it'll be just to the south of Nassau, so it won't be coming near Cuba. And if that's the case, then it takes it up the Florida coastline and potentially towards, say, Brunswick and St. Mary's, Georgia, and potentially into either South and or North Carolina. But that's 7-8 days out. So the two things that are pretty certain at this point, and we're talking about 8 days out, so we're talking about potentially by Sunday night, Monday, Tuesday, into Tuesday night. As far as South Carolina is concerned, if for whatever reason this takes a track into the Gulf and then goes up through the Florida Panhandle and then into Georgia and is onshore all throughout the duration into South Carolina, or if it goes up the East Coast and into portions of, say, Florida, Georgia, or coastal South Carolina, the one major thing I know that we're going to have is quite a bit of rainfall. How much? That's yet to be determined. If it makes onshore off of Florida and then stays just to the west of us into, say, the upstate, we're going to get a lot of rain. Whereas if it stays along the east coast of the Atlantic and then makes it through South Carolina or even makes it towards North Carolina, we'll have a lot of rain, but we'll also have a lot of wind. Now, as far as all of South Carolina, how much rain? We don't know yet. We honestly don't know. We'll definitely get rain out of it. There's absolute certainty of it. Are we going to deal with wind? Well, that also all depends. Again, you notice that I'm saying that, it might, it could, it possibly, because we really can't tell right now. But one thing's for certain, anything that comes and approaches South Carolina, whether it's coming in from Georgia or whether it's coming in from the coast, the timetable right now potentially could be as early as Sunday night into Monday morning to as late as Tuesday night into Wednesday morning. And that covers all of the Palmetto State.
Medicaid copy. You'd be contacting Lewis.
We're going to see a lot of variance in these models in the next couple.
So another question that Tony has from our viewers that, is the track going to shift a lot? Well, let's take a look at where the track is right now. A lot of these spaghetti models right now indicate that over the course of the next 24 hours, it's very consistent that it's going to be just around or north of the British Virgin Islands. 24 hours after that, it's going to put it somewhere in between Hispaniola and Puerto Rico, but still offshore. And notice that all of these spaghetti models are very, very close to each other. That's the current track right now. If you watched Daniel Bonds yesterday, these tracks were just a little bit further north. On Saturday, when Daniel was mentioning it, these tracks were again a little bit further north, and more importantly, most of the tracks up here, instead of being along the coastline of eastern northern Cuba, it was actually a little bit further north of that. If you remember on Friday, when both myself and Jim Gandy showed it, a lot of these tracks, instead of being over at Cuba, it was actually more straight towards Nassau and Freeport, the Bahamas. So these tracks have been continually shifting a little bit further south. Could this shift again? Very likely, but here's a very important thing to know. The hurricane hunters that have been flying out there since yesterday morning have been flying at low to mid levels of the hurricane. A special hurricane hunter, which is a high altitude hurricane hunter, is forecasted to lift off within the next 5 to 25 minutes. What that's going to do is going to be flying over the hurricane itself, and it's going to be dropping weather instrumentation called radiosondes or drop sounds, and that'll be dropped in various areas around the hurricane. What that's going to do, it's going to measure every aspect of the hurricane from as high above, and we're talking as high as 50,000 feet, straight down until it hits the sea. So now we'll have a better idea of the structure from top to bottom, whereas most of the Hurricane Hunter data information we've gotten has been from mid-level down to the sea. The why we want us high up, we need to see the entire structure of the hurricane. And keep in mind that this hurricane right now, in fact, let me pull up, the hurricane right now is a Category 3 with winds at 120 miles an hour, and this is a very, very tight circulation. So even though the Hurricane Hunters right now, from the mid-levels to the low levels of this hurricane, is showing potentially 131 miles an hour, there is still a lot of information that we need to learn, and very likely once we get that information, we'll have a better idea of how much more that shift is going to be.
Evan, we get a lot of questions about these models. People want to know which one is the most accurate, or maybe explain to people what these where they come from, and if any one is better than another.
Right.
When they see all these little strings on the map.
So let's go over to what the question is, that how reliable are these spaghetti models? Which one is better? Which one really does not? Well, there's multiple ones that we use. In actuality, there's well over 200 different spaghetti models that can be used. Most of them come from the same agency. So there's something called the NAM, N-A-M. That's the North American model. The North American model only goes up about 84 hours. There's also the GFS, which is the Global Forecast System model. That one can go out as far out as 7 days. There's also the National Hurricane Center's model, which is called the HRW. That one can go out 5 to 7 days. And then, of course, you hear a lot of times the Euro, or the European model. The European model also goes out as far out as 7 days. Now, historically, when it comes to tropical weather, the European model does really well both in forecasting within the next 36 to 48 hours, as well as about 3 to 4 days out from that. The GFS model has a tendency of doing well in its second, third, and fourth days. While the North American model is a very short one. It's only a 3.5 day track. So in this case, the North American model is going to end it right about here. So which ones do we use most of? Well, we use all of them. Historically, the European model does a little bit better with tropical storms, and especially from 24 to as out as 96 hours. So basically a day to 4 days. At this time right now, which is really interesting, is that the European model takes it just on the far northern coastline in central Cuba, whereas the hurricane spaghetti model takes it right into central and perhaps even southern central portions of Cuba. The GFS model, though, does take it slightly north, not so much right on the coastline, but north of the coastline of Cuba. So they're very consistent as far as all of them being in a general range. But again, the ones that typically do a lot better, especially in longer range, is the European model. Is that the only one we're going to go with? Absolutely not. That's why we use spaghetti models, because the spaghetti models give us an indication where all the different models are showing. Meanwhile, what we're actually looking at is what all of them consistently are showing, because when we look at the overall model, and the National Hurricane Center does this as well. The National Hurricane Center takes all of the models and then puts what they believe is going to be the case. That's why there's so much uncertainty, because even though a lot of these spaghetti models have it bullseyed over the north coastline of central Cuba, there's still a lot of uncertainty. So the National Hurricane Center just doesn't go over their models. They use multiple different models to make this code.
He's carrying a bag. Said he was last seen hiding behind a tree or the corner house. Looks to be in his mid-20s.
Right.
Let's just once again talk about the uncertainty.
Yeah, outbound 37 going.
Yeah, so a lot of you are just joining us right now, as Tony was telling me. So let's just go through the whole gamut in case you're just joining us right now. By midday today, actually late this morning, by 11 o'clock, the National Hurricane Center put out the latest advisory. It's still a major hurricane. Hurricane Irma right now has got winds at 120 miles an hour, gusting to 150. It's moving to the west-southwest at about 14 miles an hour. About 11:30 this morning, this is the Hurricane Hunter that's been flying all around through and dissecting Hurricane Irma. At one point around 11:30, one data point that came from the Hurricane Hunter indicated that somewhere around the surface of the sea, in the area about 25 to 30 nautical miles east of the eye of Irma, the winds were at about 131 miles an hour. Now, officially it was at 120 gusting to 150, but if it really was at 131, and that's what the National Hurricane puts it out as, that'll actually make it a major category 4 hurricane, in which wind speeds on the Safford-Simpson scale on a category 4 puts it between 130 and 156 mile an hour winds sustained. Now, it's still a 120 officially as a category 3 from the National Hurricane Center, but that's what one of the data points for the Hurricane Hunter came out. Now, there are already hurricane watches and warnings in effect. There's a hurricane warning out for the British Virgin Islands. This is the possibility of it affecting those areas, those islands, by Wednesday morning around 8 a.m. with winds sustained at about 145 miles an hour. There is a hurricane watch in effect for the U.S. Virgin Islands and the island of Puerto Rico. And by Thursday morning, it's going to put it somewhere in between on the north end of Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic and Haiti. The 5-day track, though, takes it just to the skirts of somewhere around Cuba. Now, the cone of uncertainty on this 5 days, the hurricane itself could be put anywhere around Jamaica, or is anywhere north as Nassau, the Bahamas, and anywhere in between. The National Hurricane Center does put it somewhere on the north side of Cuba, but do not concern yourself with this red line. Concern yourself right now on this 5-day track on two things. One, Category 4 with 130-mile-an-hour winds, and somewhere from Jamaica to Cuba to the Bahamas. Now, the spaghetti models on a 5-day track have indicated that this track line of all of the different models over the last 3 days have shifted a little bit further south, a little bit south, a little bit south, in which most of the computer models on a 5-day track does take it somewhere north central, central, or even south central portions of Cuba. But that's a 5-day track. So the big question for us is, okay, is it going to come to South Carolina or not? And that's the big question. So let's take this 7 days out. This puts it Saturday, 8 a.m. That's the official line that we ended at. If for any reason whatsoever there's an advancement, we're talking now Sunday night, Monday, Tuesday. And again, there's a grotesque amount of uncertainty, but let's just take this a step ahead. If for whatever reason that Hurricane Irma moves out, continuing west of Cuba, and it makes it through the Keys of Florida. Does it go up the west coast of Florida? Well, if that's the case, then eventually it'll make its way onshore through the panhandle of Florida and possibly into Georgia, and then the west side of the Palmetto State, if not the upstate. What if it goes east? If it goes up east, up the east coast, and then wherever it may make landfall, whether it's Miami, Daytona Beach, Brunswick, Georgia, Edisto Beach, Folly Beach, Myrtle Beach, even Cape Fear. There's a lot of uncertainty, but here's the one thing that you need to be aware of. The two things that there's no doubt about this, as it continues to move through, wherever it may make landfall, whatever is left over of Hurricane Irma, as it makes its way towards the southeast and the east coast, one, we will get rain. We may get a lot of rain. How much? That's still to be determined. If it comes up the west coast of Florida and then comes up by the upstate, we're going to get a considerable amount of rain. If it makes it up the east coast, not only are we going to get the rain, but it's also going to be windy, dealing with a hurricane itself. How strong is it going to be? How much rain are we going to get? How strong are the winds are when we get to South Carolina? There is absolutely no way to be certain of it. But one thing is for certain, sometime between as early as Sunday night, and that's really pushing it, to as late as Tuesday night, we'll start seeing something of Hurricane Irma affecting us. Whether it's rain or rain and wind, that still is to be determined. Just keep in mind that for now, keep it on the 5-day track. Yeah, and that puts it Saturday morning. It's Monday afternoon, folks. We have a lot of time before it comes on. So from Saturday morning, where it shows right now, to when it potentially be affecting South Carolina, there's days away, and there's absolutely no certainty of where it's going to go and how it's going to impact the Midlands, let alone South Carolina. But I will tell you, we will get rain out of it. Tony? Oh, yeah.
Twitter today to show South Carolina. What can we do with that?
Okay, so a question is that Tony had mentioned that there are a lot of memes, Facebook posts, Twitter posts. I'm going to tell you straightforward, as not only a broadcast meteorologist, but as a research meteorologist, anything that you see of Hurricane Irma is going to look only like this. Whether it comes from our TV station, another TV station in South Carolina, or the National Hurricane Center, a 5-day track is it. Period. There have been a lot of fake information that's been put out there, a lot of bogus information. If you see anything that's got a track of 7 days and they're saying that this is what's going to happen, not only is it false, but it's wrong. The reason why the National Hurricane Center and News 19 ends it on a 5-day track is that's about as accurate as we're going to be. And look at the cone of uncertainty. We don't know by Saturday morning if it's going to be closer towards Jamaica, or it's going to be closer towards the Bahamas, or it's going to make a beeline right for Cuba. So here's the things about any pictures or any information you see out there on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, no matter where you see it. Number one, it should look like this. This is the official information from the National Hurricane Center. Anything you see is wrong. Number two, if you're one of those people that take these and augment it and make it track that it heads off into the Gulf and then somewhere in the northern Gulf states, or it's tracking all the way up and through the Carolinas or making landfall in Florida, the bottom line is this. Not only are you putting out wrong information, but this is a government-issued data from the National Hurricane Center that has their logos on it. If you take that information and deface it and augment it to the way you think you're doing it, that's also a federal crime. Putting out that information, falsifying information, especially from the National Hurricane Center, of indicating where this is going to be, where you think is, that's a federal offense. So don't even bother doing it. For all of the viewers who are looking for as much information out there from anything on Hurricane Irma, the bottom line is you should only see a 5-day track, and this should be absolutely identical to the National Hurricane Center. In fact, if you go to the National Hurricane Center, which is nhc.gov, nationalhurricanecenter.gov, the exact same information that we're putting out there is exactly what you're going to see from the National Hurricane Center, and should not look any other different than this. Some may have spaghetti models, and that's fine, but a 5-day track looking very similar, if not exactly like this, is what you just be looking for. Yeah. Yeah, Tony said that, there's a lot of amateur meteorologists out there, and let me stress this. There's a lot of weather enthusiasts out there. There's a lot of people who say that they love the weather, they know tropical storms, they know Palmetto State weather. They can say everything and anything that they want. The bottom line is that if you want accurate information, especially if it's depicted by a graphic, when it comes to Hurricane Irma, it should look like this. Okay, I'm not going to say that I know